What if the apocalypse has a name, not a vague concept like judgment or a final battle, but a specific chilling designation, a word whispered in dread across 2,000 years of history, a name that translates from ancient tongues into a single terrifying promise, bitterness. It is a name that belongs to a star, a celestial executioner, described in the last, most cryptic book of the Christian Bible, the Revelation of John. In this fever dream of prophecy, an angel sounds a trumpet, and a great star, blazing like a torch, plummets from the heavens. It does not simply strike the earth. It poisons it, turning a third of the world's rivers and springs of water into a toxic, undrinkable brew from which many will perish. For countless generations, this vision remained a terrifying abstraction, a piece of symbolic eschatology to be debated by theologians and feared by the devout. It was a metaphor, a warning, a divine allegory for spiritual decay or perhaps a great apostasy. It was a story told to caution and to control, but it was never meant to be a literal entry in an astronomical catalogue. It was never supposed to have coordinates. It was never supposed to be something we could track with a telescope. And yet here we are. We live in an age of unprecedented scientific vision, our eyes fixed on the heavens with a clarity our ancestors could never have imagined. We have mapped the architecture of galaxies, listened to the echoes of the Big Bang, and identified countless worlds orbiting distant suns. The cosmos, once a realm of gods and omens, has been steadily transformed into a landscape of physics, chemistry, and predictable orbital mechanics. We tell ourselves, stripped the sky of its ancient magic and its ancient dread. We replaced superstition with spectroscopy and portents with probability. A comet is no longer a harbinger of plague or the fall of kings. It is a pristine remnant of our solar system's formation, a dirty snowball of ice, dust, and rock, whose trajectory can be calculated with astonishing precision. We understand its composition, we can predict its path, and we feel a sense of mastery over the celestial narrative. But what happens when the cold, hard data of science begins to sketch a picture that looks unnervingly like the fever dream of an ancient prophet? What do we do when a newly discovered object, a real, tangible body, hurtling through our cosmic neighborhood starts to behave in ways that echo with chilling fidelity? The script of this apocalyptic star. This is the disquieting question that arose from the darkness on December 28, 2019. On that night, a robotic eye, part of the Asteroid Terrestrial Impact Last Alert System, or ATLAS, in Hawaii, captured a faint smudge of light moving against the stellar background. It was an automated detection, a ghost in the machine initially logged with the sterile designation C 2019Y4. But as observatories around the world turned their gaze toward this newborn visitor, a new, more profound identity emerged. Its trajectory was not a closed loop, an ellipse that would bring it back time and again like Halley's famous comet. No, this object was on a hyperbolic path, a cosmic one-way ticket into the inner solar system. It was an interstellar interloper, a traveler from the vast frozen depths of space, possibly from the Oort cloud, that great mysterious sphere of trillions of icy bodies encasing our solar system like a fragile shell. And so it was given a new name, one that signified its alien origin, 3I, Atlas. The I for interstellar. It was only the third such object ever detected. For a few weeks it was a curiosity for the astronomical community, another puzzle piece in the grand model of our solar system. But then something extraordinary began to happen. 3I, Atlas, began to brighten, and not just by a little. It brightened at a staggering, almost unprecedented rate. By early 2020, it was increasing its luminosity by a factor of thousands, transforming from an obscure target for professional observatories into something amateur astronomers could spot with backyard telescopes. Projections fueled by this explosive surge in activity became wild, almost fantastical. Some astronomers predicted it could become the brightest comet in a generation, perhaps even visible during the daytime, a spectacular celestial sign hanging in the sky for all the world to see. It was this magnificent accelerating brilliance that first caught their attention. A great star burning like a torch, the words of the prophecy dormant for centuries, began to stir in the digital ether of the 21st century. Online forums, social media, and quiet conversations began to connect the dots. The comet was on a path that would bring it perilously close to the sun, and its composition, like all comets, was a cocktail of frozen water and volatile compounds, including cyanogen, a chemical relative of cyanide, a cosmic snowball packed with potential poison. It was becoming a spectacle. It was on a path from the outer darkness, and it was made of materials that, if dispersed in the right way, could indeed make the waters bitter. The whispers grew louder. Could this be it? Could this celestial wanderer, this ghost from the interstellar void, actually be the object John of Patmos saw in his vision on a remote Greek island 2 millennia ago? Is 3I Atlas the star called Wormwood? To even ask, the question feels like a transgression, a dangerous blurring of the lines between two worlds we have tried so desperately to keep separate, the empirical realm of science and the numinous realm of faith. One is a world of evidence, of testable hypotheses and peer-reviewed data. The other is a world of revelation of sacred texts and unshakable belief. For the scientist, the comet's behavior, while dramatic, has a perfectly natural explanation. As it neared the sun, the increasing solar radiation was sublimating its ices, releasing vast clouds of gas and dust that reflected more sunlight, creating a magnificent but ultimately temporary shroud its coma and tail. Its explosive brightening was likely a sign of instability, the prelude to its own demise, as the sun's tidal forces and thermal stress began to tear its fragile nucleus apart. There was no angel, no trumpet, no divine wrath. There was only physics, brutal and beautiful. For the believer, however, these physical processes are not an explanation. They are the mechanism, the method by which prophecy is fulfilled. They see not the random disintegration of an icy body, but the deliberate act of a great star falling from heaven, breaking apart to sow its bitterness across the waters of the world. They see the hand of God moving within the laws of astrophysics, using the predictable machinery of the universe to enact a supernatural plan laid down at the beginning of time. This is the chasm we will attempt to cross. A journey into the heart of a mystery that pits the telescope against the sacred text and orbital mechanics against divine revelation. Our investigation must begin not in the cold vacuum of space, but in the fertile, often fraught landscape of the human mind. For millennia, we have looked to the heavens for meaning, projecting our hopes, our fears, and our gods onto the silent, glittering canvas above. The sky was our first clock, our first calendar, and our first map. The predictable waltz of the sun, moon, and stars gave us order, rhythm, and a sense of our place in a vast, unchanging cosmos. They were reliable, eternal. But comets were different. They were celestial anarchists. They followed no established rules, appearing without warning from the dark margins of the sky, blazing across the familiar constellations like a scratch on a perfect masterpiece. They were hairy, unpredictable, and ephemeral. And so, across almost every culture, they became symbols of chaos and upheaval, divine messengers of terrible news. The Babylonians saw them as celestial omens foretelling the deaths of kings. The ancient Chinese meticulously recorded them as broom stars, portents of war, plague, and famine. The Roman historian Suetonius linked the appearance of a great comet to the assassination of Julius Caesar, believing it to be Caesar's soul ascending to the heavens. The magnificent Bayeux Tapestry, which chronicles the Norman conquest of England in 1066, famously depicts King Harold being told of a terrifying omen in the sky. Halley's Comet, a celestial visitor that seemed to bless the ambition of William the Conqueror and seal the doom of the doom. Anglo-Saxons. This deep-seated cultural programming, this instinct to see cosmic events as divine commentary, has never truly left us. We may have driven it underground, cloaking it in the more respectable language of synchronicity or cosmic significance, but the impulse remains. We are meaning-seeking creatures, pattern-matching animals in a universe that often seems devoid of either. And in times of great uncertainty, when our terrestrial world feels unstable and chaotic, that ancient impulse to look upward for answers, for warnings, for a sign that there is a larger story at play, becomes almost irresistible. And the year 2020, when 3I, Atlas, made its dramatic entrance, was nothing if not a time of profound global anxiety. A worldwide pandemic was gathering pace, economies were shuttering, societies were locking down, and a pervasive sense of fear and fragility had settled over the planet. The world felt broken adrift. It was into this superheated atmosphere of dread that the comet arrived, its accelerating brilliance a seemingly perfect celestial mirror to the escalating crisis on the ground. It felt to many like a sign. It felt like an overture. The prophecy of Wormwood is not merely about a poisoned water supply. It is about a moment of profound disruption, a cataclysmic judgment that shatters the established order. The text speaks of chaos, of bitterness, of death, delivered from the heavens at a time when humanity is already reeling. The parallels were not just cosmetic, they were emotional, psychological. The arrival of a potential doomsday comet at the precise moment the world seemed to be teetering on the brink of collapse was for many a confluence too powerful to ignore. But to truly understand the Wormwood theory, we must dissect not only our psychology but also the prophecy itself. Where did this terrifying vision come from? The Book of Revelation is the final explosive chapter of the biblical canon, a work of apocalyptic literature so vivid and violent it has both fascinated and terrified readers for centuries. It is filled with monstrous beasts, celestial wars, and devastating plagues. Its author, a man named John, was writing from exile, likely during a period of intense persecution of early Christians by the Roman Empire. Scholars have long debated whether his visions were meant to be a literal roadmap of the future or a symbolic coded critique of the oppressive political powers of his own time, a message of hope to the persecuted that God would ultimately triumph over the tyrannical Babylon of Rome. The Star Wormwood is part of a sequence of 7 trumpet judgments, each one unleashing a new horror upon the earth. Is it a literal physical object, or is it a symbol for a powerful corrupting leader, a fallen star whose bitter ideology poisons the spiritual wellsprings of humanity? Could waters refer not to literal rivers, but to peoples, nations, doctrines, as they often do elsewhere in the Bible? The text is a Rorschach test of faith and fear, and its interpretation has shifted dramatically with the scientific understanding of each passing age. For centuries, a falling star was just that, a point of light streaking across the sky. But as our understanding of the solar system grew, the identity of this celestial object began to evolve in the popular imagination. Perhaps it was an asteroid, a city-killing rock from the heavens, or maybe, just maybe, it was a comet. This is the specific charge we must investigate. The claim is not just that a celestial object will cause destruction, but that Comet 3I, Atlas, specifically matches the description of Wormwood. The case rests on a series of unsettling correlations. First, its appearance as a great star burning like a torch, the explosive brightening of 3I, Atlas, creating a vast luminous coma that outshone its tiny nucleus, fits this ancient description with uncanny visual power. Second, the concept of falling from heaven. While the comet was not on a direct collision course with Earth, its trajectory was that of a long, dramatic fall toward the Sun, a celestial plummet from the outer darkness into the heart of our system. Proponents of the theory argue that falling may not mean a direct impact, but rather the act of the object disintegrating its constituent parts, falling into the inner solar system, and potentially crossing Earth's path. This leads to the third and most crucial point, the poisoning of the waters. The nucleus of a comet is a fragile conglomerate of ice, rock, and dust bound together by frozen gases. As it approaches the Sun, this structure can be torn apart, a process known as fragmentation. If 3I Atlas were to disintegrate at the right point in its orbit, it would create a vast debris field, a river of dust and ice particles. Should the Earth then pass through this debris field, our atmosphere would be inundated with a spectacular and potentially toxic meteor shower. The very chemicals known to exist in comets, including cyanides and other noxious compounds, could in theory be deposited into our upper atmosphere, eventually settling into our water sources. A third of the waters became wormwood. The name itself, wormwood, is the English translation of the Greek absinthos, a bitter herb, Artemisia absinthium, known for its toxic properties. A comet breaking apart and seeding our planet with its own bitter primordial chemistry seems to some to be the most scientifically plausible mechanism for the fulfillment of this ancient, terrifying vision. So we stand at a profound crossroads, a place where the deep-seated human need for meaning collides with the cold, impartial observations of science. We are faced with a series of questions that challenge the very foundations of our modern worldview. Is the universe speaking to us in a language of signs and wonders, a language we have forgotten how to read? Or are we simply imposing our own ancient narratives of doom and salvation onto the random, chaotic, yet ultimately natural phenomena of the cosmos? Is the connection between 3I, Atlas, and the Wormwood prophecy a breathtaking case of divine foreshadowing, a 2,000-year-old warning finally coming to pass? Or is it a stunning example of confirmation bias? A psychological illusion where we find the patterns we desperately want or fear to see. The stakes of this inquiry are immense. If the wormwood theory is true, then it validates a literal interpretation of biblical prophecy and suggests we are living in a divinely orchestrated end-time drama. It would mean the universe is not the cold, indifferent machine we imagined it to be, but a stage for a cosmic story in which we are the final actors. If it is false, however, then it serves as a powerful cautionary tale about the enduring power of myth, the allure of apocalyptic thinking, and our profound vulnerability to fear in the face of the unknown. It would force us to confront the uncomfortable truth that we may be alone with the consequences of our own actions, in a universe that offers no script, no director, and no final act. This is the journey we are about to embark upon. A quest to separate fact from faith, astronomy from eschatology, and the genuine mysteries of the cosmos from the projections of our own deepest anxieties. We will travel back in time to the wind-swept island of Patmos to understand the world that birthed this prophecy. And we will journey to the cutting edge of modern astronomy to follow the tragic, beautiful, and revelatory life story of the celestial visitor that reignited an ancient fear. The story of 3I, Atlas, is not just the story of a comet, it is the story of ourselves, our search for meaning, and our eternal dance with the darkness between the stars. The evidence is waiting. The verdict is yours to decide. What if the end of the world has a name, not a concept like apocalypse or Armageddon, but a proper noun, a designation spoken aloud in hushed tones for 2 millennia, a name that tastes of ash and bitterness on the tongue? In the sprawling, feverish vision of a prophet exiled on the Greek island of Patmos, such a name was recorded, etched into the final terrifying book of the Christian Bible. It is a single chilling word that has haunted the architecture of Western eschatology ever since a celestial specter waiting in the wings of history. The book is Revelation, and the name is Wormwood. The passage itself, nestled within the percussive wrath of the 7 trumpets, is as stark as it is poetic. John of Patmos describes the sounding of the 3rd trumpet, a divine signal that unleashes a catastrophe not upon the land or the sea, but upon the very source of life itself, the fresh water of the earth. He writes, "And the 3rd angel sounded, and there fell a great star from heaven, burning as it were a lamp, and it fell upon the 3rd part of the rivers, and upon the fountains of waters. and the name of the star is called Wormwood, and the third part of the waters became wormwood, and many men died of the waters because they were made bitter. It is an image of profound cosmic violation. A celestial body, a thing of beauty and navigational certainty, becomes a vector of poison. The heavens, once a symbol of divine order, instead hurl a contaminant into the heart of the world, turning rivers and springs into instruments of death. For centuries, theologians and scholars have grappled with this vision, attempting to anchor its ethereal horror in some tangible reality. What precisely did the prophet see in his mind's eye? What did he mean by a great star? To our modern minds, conditioned by the elegant physics of stellar fusion, the word star conjures images of distant suns, titanic spheres of hydrogen, helium burning across trillions of miles. But to an observer in the first-century Roman Empire, the sky was a vastly different place, a realm of more ambiguous and often terrifying possibilities. The word we translate as star, the Greek times astrotimes, was a far more encompassing term. It was a catch-all designation for nearly any point of light in the celestial dome, fixed or otherwise. And times astrotimes could be a planet, those wandering lights that traced mysterious paths through the zodiac. It could be a meteor, a fleeting slash of fire that briefly tore the fabric of the night, a phenomenon universally seen as an omen. Most intriguingly, it could be a comet. The ancients called them times asteres cometae, times the hairy stars. They were not the predictable clockwork wanderers we understand today, but terrifying spectral apparitions. They appeared without warning, grew luminous tails like ghostly hair or a warrior's bloodied sword, and lingered in the sky for weeks or months, presiding over the affairs of humanity like a malevolent celestial eye. The Roman historian Cassius Dio described the comet that preceded the death of Agrippa as a comet star, a fearful object that hung over the city. The historian Josephus linked another comet, shaped like a sword, to the impending destruction of Jerusalem. To the ancient mind, a comet was the ultimate disruption of cosmic harmony, a divine message written in fire and dust. A great star falling from heaven, burning like a lamp or a torch. This language fits the terrifying majesty of a major comet with chilling precision. Throughout history, as great comets have blazed their paths through our inner solar system, the shadow of the Wormwood prophecy has often followed them. In times of plague, of war, of societal collapse, observers would look up at the silent, luminous visitor and see not a ball of ice and rock, but the heralding of the third trumpet. The prophecy became a kind of interpretive lens, a dark filter through which humanity viewed moments of celestial grandeur intertwined with terrestrial suffering. It was a story that adapted its symbolism, potent enough to find new meaning in new eras. In the 20th century, following the catastrophic explosion at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in 1986, the prophecy found a shocking new resonance. The name Chernobyl, in Ukrainian, is a word for a species of mugwort, a plant belonging to the same family as, and often translated as, wormwood. The idea that the bitterness rained down not from the sky but up from a man-made disaster gave the prophecy a terrifyingly modern allegorical power. The star, some argued, was not a literal object but the metaphorical star of human hubris falling from the heavens of our own technological ambition. The prophecy seemed destined to remain in this realm of metaphor and theological debate, a ghost story told by civilizations to frighten themselves about the future. For 2,000 years, the identity of this celestial destroyer was a phantom, an unsolved case file in the annals of eschatology. Any connection to a real astronomical object was purely retrospective, a pattern imposed on the past. There was never a moment when humanity could look up, point to a specific object moving across the sky, and feel the cold dread of a prophecy unfolding in real time. The trumpet, it seemed, remained silent until perhaps the final days of 2019. On the 28th of December, on the slumbering volcanic slopes of Mauna Loa in Hawaii, a robotic eye opened to the sky. It was not a human observer driven by poetry or fear, but a dispassionate automated sentinel. This was the Asteroid Terrestrial Impact Last Alert System, or ATLAS, a pair of telescopes designed for a profoundly practical purpose: to scan the entire observable sky every few nights, hunting for asteroids on a collision course with Earth. It is a planetary defense system, a silent guardian against a very real, scientifically understood threat. On that night, the system flagged a new object. In the flood of data, amidst the familiar tracks of known asteroids and the faint glow of distant galaxies, there was a faint, fuzzy smudge where nothing had been before. It was designated with the sterile precision of modern astronomy C, 2019 Y4. The C marked it as a comet with a long period or non-periodic orbit. 2019 was the year of its discovery. Y4 indicated it was the fourth such object discovered in the last half of December. To the worldwide community of astronomers, this was initially just another routine discovery, one of dozens of comets catalogued each year. Computers at the Minor Planet Center in Massachusetts began their work crunching the numbers from the initial observations, plotting the object's trajectory. The first results that came back were intriguing. C, 2019 Y4 was on an immense sweeping path around the Sun, a vast parabolic arc that suggested it was a visitor from the most remote and mysterious region of our solar system, the Oort cloud. This is a theoretical spherical shell of icy bodies, a cosmic halo surrounding our Sun at a distance of nearly a light year. It is the solar system's deep freeze, a repository of primordial material left over from the very birth of our star and its planets. Objects from the Oort cloud are incredibly rare visitors. They are pristine relics, time capsules from 4.5 billion years ago, and their journey into the inner solar system is often their first and only one. Almost immediately, something else became apparent. Comet Atlas, as it was now nicknamed, was brightening, and it was brightening at a truly astonishing rate. Comets become visible as they approach the Sun. Its heat causes their ices to sublimate, to turn directly from a solid into a gas, creating a glowing atmosphere called a coma, and eventually a tail of dust and ions. Most comets follow a predictable formula for how their brightness increases as their distance from the Sun decreases. But Atlas was defying all the models. Week by week through January and February of 2020, its magnitude surged. It was outperforming expectations by a staggering margin, brightening far more rapidly than a typical comet of its size. The astronomical community began to buzz with a palpable excitement. Online forums and university email chains were electric, with new observations and revised predictions. The reason for this excitement was the comet's calculated trajectory. Its path would carry it swooping in from high above the plane of the planets, passing relatively close to Earth in mid-May, before making its closest approach to the Sun, its perihelion, at the end of that month. At perihelion, it would be inside the orbit of Mercury, subjecting it to the full ferocious blast of solar radiation. Given its extraordinary rate of brightening, the projections became more and more spectacular. Early models suggested it could reach a visual magnitude of +2 or even 0, as bright as the most brilliant stars in the night sky, easily visible to the naked eye, even from light-polluted cities. But as the weeks wore on and the comet continued to overperform, the forecasts grew bolder. Some astronomers began to whisper the two words that electrify every skygazer: Great Comet. This is not a formal designation, but an honorific, reserved for comets of such exceptional brilliance that they become a global spectacle, a breathtaking sight that can dominate the twilight sky, and in rare cases even become visible in broad daylight. The possibility was intoxicating. The last truly great comet in the Northern Hemisphere had been Comet Hale-Bopp in 1997. An entire generation had grown up without witnessing such a celestial event. For astronomers, this was a golden opportunity. A pristine Oort cloud object arriving for the first time, was a scientific prize of the highest order. Its composition could offer unprecedented clues about the primordial nebula from which our solar system was born. The physics of its outgassing, the development of its coma and tail, the way it interacted with the solar wind, all of this presented a chance to test and refine our understanding of these enigmatic visitors. It was a chance to witness the raw, beautiful mechanics of the cosmos in our own backyard. For amateur astronomers and the public, it was simpler, a promise of pure, unadulterated awe, the prospect of a magnificent ethereal banner unfurling across the spring sky, a shared moment of wonder for the entire planet. But as news of this rapidly brightening comet began to seep out of the enclosed world of observatories and scientific journals and onto the wider internet, a different kind of observation was beginning. The world in early 2020 was a place of growing anxiety and uncertainty. A global pandemic was beginning its inexorable spread, grounding societies to a halt and filling the air with a pervasive sense of dread. And into this atmosphere of fear came the news of a spectacular celestial object, a great star on a path to fall from the heavens and burn like a torch as it rounded the sun. The astronomical facts were clear: a comet made of ice and rock, following the predictable laws of gravity and thermodynamics. It posed no physical threat to Earth. Its trajectory was well understood, and its closest approach would still be over 70 million miles away. It was, for all intents and purposes, a beautiful but harmless spectacle. Yet you cannot easily separate the human mind from its deep history of myth and symbol. The narrative was simply too potent to ignore. The timing was too resonant. A once-in-a-generation comet, arriving at a moment of unprecedented global crisis. People began to connect the scientific data points to the ancient prophetic verses. They saw the comet's path, a trajectory that would indeed see it appear to fall toward the sun from our perspective on Earth. They heard the descriptions of it burning brighter and brighter, a celestial lamp. They felt the bitterness of the moment, a world sick with a new plague and fearful of what was to come. For the astronomers tracking Object C, 2019 Y4, the unfolding event was a question of physics. They asked, how bright will it get? Will its nucleus remain stable under the sun's heat? What secrets of the solar system's formation will its light reveal to our spectrographs? But for a growing number of people around the world connected by the instantaneous tendrils of social media, the questions being asked were entirely different. The scientists saw a comet, but these observers, looking at the same data through a different lens, began to see something else entirely. They saw a prophecy taking flight. They saw a timetable being met. They saw a name written not in the computer code of the Minor Planet Center, but in the ancient apocalyptic scripture of Patmos. Could this magnificent celestial visitor, this beacon of scientific wonder and potential natural beauty, truly be the star of revelation? Could its name, in a language far older than astronomy, really be Wormwood? But the spectacle we had been, promised the celestial masterpiece, scripted in the laws of orbital mechanics, would never arrive. Instead, something far stranger, far more unsettling began to unfold in the silent void. The universe, it seemed, had other plans for Comet Atlas. The grand performance was cancelled, replaced by a slow, ethereal disintegration. Telescopes that had been eagerly tracking its triumphant march toward the sun started to see not a sharpening point of light, but a softening, a blurring at its core. The comet's brilliant condensed nucleus, the very heart of this icy wanderer, was losing its integrity. At first it was a subtle shift, a change in morphology that only the most seasoned observers could detect. But soon the evidence became undeniable, transmitted from observatories on remote mountaintops and from the unblinking eye of the Hubble Space Telescope. Comet 3I, Atlas, was coming apart. It wasn't a singular violent explosion, a dramatic cinematic cataclysm. It was something more akin to a cosmic dissolving, a graceful but inexorable surrender to the sun's tidal forces and thermal stresses. The solid mountain of ice and rock forged in the primordial cold beyond Neptune was fracturing, breaking into pieces. What had been a single coherent object was becoming a ghostly procession, a funeral train of icy shards following the same dying orbit. To the astronomers who had watched its meteoric rise in brightness, this was a profound disappointment, the celestial equivalent of a prodigy who burns out before their time. The comet of the century was becoming a faint gossamer smear against the velvet of space. They analyzed the light curves, the subtle shifts in luminosity, and documented the emergence of distinct fragments, first 2, then 4, then a cascade of smaller pieces, each trailing its own faint tail of dust and gas. It was a beautiful death, a scientifically fascinating one, but a death nonetheless. The great comet was no more. It had become a string of cosmic pearls, a phantom of what could have been. And in that moment of scientific anticlimax, in that quiet and distant fragmentation, a completely different narrative began to take root here on Earth. For millions, this was not the end of the story. It was the beginning. It started as these things often do not, in an observatory, but in the sprawling, interconnected digital nervous system of humanity. It began with a whisper, a question posed in an obscure online forum, a comment on a social media post. The comet wasn't just dying, it was fulfilling a different kind of destiny. The scientific explanation that the comet's nucleus was perhaps too fragile, a loosely bound rubble pile unequal to the task of its solar passage, was perfectly logical. It was also, for some, completely unsatisfying. In a world suddenly gripped by a profound and pervasive anxiety, simple physics felt inadequate to explain an event that seemed laden with significance. Humanity was collectively holding its breath. A novel virus was silently encircling the globe, forcing us into our homes, emptying our streets and filling our hospitals. We were living through a moment of shared vulnerability, a planetary crisis that felt biblical in its scale and scope. The familiar structures of daily life were dissolving just as surely as the comet's icy heart. Into this vacuum of certainty, this global atmosphere of fear and isolation, Comet Atlas fell not as a scientific curiosity, but as a potential sign. A cosmic omen. And it had the perfect, terrible name, Atlas. For astronomers, the name was purely functional, an acronym for the observatory that discovered it, the Asteroid Terrestrial Impact Last Alert System. A robotic, automated sky survey designed to protect Earth from cosmic threats. Its purpose was mundane, systematic, protective, but stripped of its technical context and viewed through the lens of mythology, the name took on a far heavier, more ominous weight. Atlas the Titan from Greek myth, condemned by the gods to bear the crushing weight of the heavens on his shoulders for eternity, a symbol not of protection but of immense burden of suffering, of a world-shaking punishment. Suddenly, the comet wasn't just an object, it was a metaphor. It was the weight of the world, the burden of a global pandemic, the coming judgment made manifest in the sky. This collision of a portentous name with a moment of unprecedented global distress created a kind of prophetic tinderbox. All it needed was a spark. That spark came from the comet's own bizarre behavior. The fragmentation, which for scientists was the end of the show, became, for this new school of thought, the central, most significant act of the drama. A single great star falling from the sky and breaking apart. This image resonated with an ancient, deeply embedded eschatological tradition. It plugged directly into a powerful current of apocalyptic belief that flows just beneath the surface of modern culture. The digital world became the vector. The theory spread with a speed and efficiency that no medieval prophet could have ever imagined. It was a mimetic virus, replicating across platforms, mutating with each share, and infecting the feeds of millions. YouTube channels with slick graphics and solemn-voiced narrators stitched together Hubble images with biblical verses. Facebook groups became echo chambers, where believers reinforced each other's interpretations. finding patterns in astronomical data that scientists could not see. Any skepticism was dismissed as blindness, the refusal of a secular world to see the writing on the celestial wall. Algorithms designed to maximize engagement did the rest. They detected the surge of interest, the passionate arguments in the comments, the flurry of shares, and they pushed the content to more and more people. If you showed even a fleeting interest in prophecy, ancient mysteries, or the end times, the story of Comet Atlas was delivered to you packaged as urgent breaking news. The slow, cautious language of scientific papers, filled with qualifications and uncertainties, was no match for the thunderous certainty of the new digital prophets. While astronomers spoke of sublimation and rotational disruption, these online prognosticators spoke of judgment, revelation, and the fulfillment of a 2,000-year-old warning. They gave the comet its true name, the name they believed it was always meant to carry: Wormwood. The name comes from one of the most cryptic and terrifying passages in the New Testament, from the book of Revelation, the 8th chapter. It describes an angel sounding a trumpet heralding a great cataclysm. And the third angel sounded, the scripture reads, and there fell a great star from heaven, burning as it were a lamp, and it fell upon the third part of the rivers and upon the fountains of waters. And the name of the star is called Wormwood. And the third part of the waters became wormwood, and many men died of the waters, because they were made bitter. For centuries, this passage has haunted the imaginations of scholars and mystics. A great star falling from the sky, poisoning the waters and bringing death. It is a powerful, terrifying prophecy, and for a growing number of people, in the spring of 2020, Comet 3I Atlas fit the description with chilling precision. It was they, argued the great star. Its fragmentation was the act of falling from heaven. Its name, Atlas, symbolized the great bitterness and burden it was to bring upon the world. They saw its approach during a plague as no coincidence, but as a clear part of a divinely orchestrated sequence of end-of-days events. The bitter waters, they claimed, weren't literal. They were a metaphor for the bitterness of global suffering, the poison of the pandemic that was seeping into every corner of human life. Every new piece of data from the scientific community was reinterpreted and woven into this burgeoning apocalyptic tapestry. When astronomers noted the comet's greenish hue, a result of cyanogen and diatomic carbon fluorescing in sunlight, it was immediately cited as proof of its poisonous nature. The fact that the comet would not and could not ever hit the Earth was a mere technicality easily dismissed. The impact, they insisted, was not meant to be physical but spiritual. It was a sign, not a missile. A harbinger of what was to come, a warning that the final act of human history was about to begin. The Wormwood theory was born. It was a perfect storm of ancient prophecy, modern technology, and global anxiety, a story that provided a sense of meaning, however terrifying, in a time that felt meaningless and chaotic. It transformed a dying chunk of ice and rock billions of miles from home into the most significant celestial event in human history. It was a testament to our enduring, desperate need to find patterns in the chaos, to believe that the things that happen in the heavens happen for us. And as the fragmented ghost of Comet Atlas continued its silent journey toward the sun, millions looked up, not with scientific curiosity, but with a sense of dreadful anticipation, convinced they were witnessing the fulfillment of a terrible and ancient truth. And so, the digital storm raged, a tempest of fear whipped into a frenzy by a million voices at once. While the world looked up, seeing not a comet but a prophecy, a different kind of network was humming to life. It wasn't a network of panic, but of patience. Not of speculation, but of calculation. Across the globe, in the quiet domes of mountaintop sanctuaries and the chilled control rooms of orbital sentinels, a silent, coordinated mobilization was underway. This was the scientific community's response, not to the comet itself, but to the shadow of dread it now cast over the public imagination. The mission was no longer merely observation. It had become an act of rescue, an attempt to pull civilization back from a precipice of its own making. The first order of business was to gather a weight of evidence so immense, so irrefutable, that it could act as a gravitational anchor against the rising tide of hysteria. This required more than just a single telescope taking a pretty picture. It demanded a global collaboration, a symphony of observation playing out across continents and time zones. The great eyes of the world turned towards 3I, Atlas. From the volcanic slopes of Mauna Kea in Hawaii, the twin Keck telescopes, each with a primary mirror 10 meters across, began their nightly vigil, their adaptive optics piercing the shimmering veil of Earth's atmosphere to achieve stunning clarity. They weren't just looking at the comet, they were dissecting it, slicing its faint reflected sunlight into its constituent parts. Simultaneously, high above the clouds and the distortions of our world, the Hubble Space Telescope, that tireless servant of cosmic discovery, was reprogrammed for a series of urgent observations. Its vantage point in orbit offered an unparalleled, crystal-clear view of the drama unfolding millions of kilometers away. Hubble's task was to provide the fine detail to zoom in on the nucleus, the very heart of the object fueling so much terrestrial anxiety. Meanwhile, in the Atacama Desert of Chile, the European Southern Observatory's Very Large Telescope Array, a quartet of colossal instruments worked in concert, their combined power creating a virtual mirror of staggering proportions capable of resolving details that would otherwise be lost in the cosmic haze. They tracked the comet's motion with obsessive, microscopic precision, logging every subtle shift, every minute deviation in its path. This global network of glass and steel, of silicon and software, was building a dataset of unprecedented richness, a mosaic of information that would allow us to understand not what people feared the comet was, but what it truly physically was. The first major clue, the very event that had thrown gasoline on the fire of the Wormwood theory, was the comet's visible fragmentation. To believers, this was the beginning of the end, the shattering of the vessel that would release its biblical poison upon the world. It looked to the untrained eye like a celestial object in its death throes, an omen breaking apart before its final devastating plunge. But to astronomers, what they were witnessing was not supernatural. It was something they had seen many times before. It was, in a word, nature. To understand what was happening to 3I Atlas, you have to understand what a comet fundamentally is. Forget the image of a solid monolithic rock hurtling through space. That's an asteroid. A comet is something far more delicate, far more ephemeral. Imagine a dirty snowball, but one packed together loosely, a fragile agglomeration of water ice, frozen gases like carbon dioxide and carbon monoxide, and a significant amount of dust and rock. This cosmic artifact, born in the frigid dark outskirts of our solar system, in a region known as the Oort cloud, had spent billions of years in a state of deep freeze. Its journey towards the sun was for this fragile body a journey towards its own dissolution. As 3I, Atlas, drew closer to our star, the sun's radiation, its relentless blowtorch, began to heat the surface of its nucleus. This is where the process of sublimation begins. The ice on the comet's surface didn't melt from solid to liquid. The vacuum of space doesn't allow for that. Instead, it transitioned directly from a solid state into a gas, erupting from the nucleus in powerful concentrated jets. You could see them in the high-resolution images, plumes of vapor and dust blasting away into space, creating the beautiful, ethereal coma and tail that we associate with comets. But these jets were not merely for show. They were engines powerful and unpredictable. As these geysers of gas erupted from various points on the nucleus, they acted like tiny, chaotic rocket thrusters. If the nucleus were a perfect, non-rotating sphere, these forces might have balanced out. But the nucleus of 3I Atlas was like all cometary nuclei, an irregularly shaped, lumpy object, likely tumbling through space. The jets of gas firing unevenly imparted a spin, day by day, week by week, as the comet neared the sun and the heating intensified, the jets grew stronger, and the spin rate increased. The comet was being torqued by its own outgassing like a child on a playground swing, pushing themselves higher and higher. It was spinning faster and faster, a celestial dervish succumbing to the sun's fiery sermon. Every object has a limit, a point at which the rotational forces pulling it apart overwhelm the gravitational and tensile forces holding it together. For a solid piece of rock, that limit is incredibly high. But for a loosely packed, porous body of ice and dust like 3I, Atlas, that limit is shockingly low. The very structure of the comet was its fatal flaw. The scientific community watched, fascinated, as the centrifugal forces reached their inevitable breaking point. The nucleus, unable to withstand the strain of its own accelerating pirouette, simply crumbled. It fractured into several large pieces, each piece becoming a miniature comet in its own right, sprouting its own coma and tail. The images sent back by Hubble were hauntingly beautiful, showing not a single point of light, but a ghostly chain, a string of celestial pearls drifting apart in the silent darkness. This was not the act of an angry deity. This was physics, pure and simple. It was the same process that shattered comet Shoemaker-Levy 9 before its spectacular impact with Jupiter in 1994. It was the same process observed in countless other comets that ventured too close to the Sun. The so-called shattering of Wormwood was in reality the natural, predictable, and frankly quite gentle disintegration of a fragile visitor from the outer solar system. The apocalyptic interpretation saw a divine weapon being armed. The astronomical observation revealed a cosmic snowball melting on the celestial sidewalk. The core tenet of the fear, the idea that this was an unprecedented, unnatural event, was the first casualty of the data. The comet wasn't preparing for war. It was simply falling apart, a victim of the sun's indifferent warmth. With the how of the fragmentation explained, the next critical question, the one that truly mattered for the fate of our world, was the where. Where were these fragments going? The online prophecies were clear, they were coming for us. A shotgun blast of cosmic shrapnel aimed directly at Earth. Here, the science of orbital mechanics provided an answer not of ambiguity or probability, but of cold, hard certainty. Tracking the trajectory of an object through the solar system is one of the most precise and well-understood disciplines in all of science. We live in a gravitational pinball machine, dominated by the immense pull of the Sun, with the giant planets, particularly Jupiter, acting as the primary bumpers capable of deflecting and reshaping the paths of smaller bodies. From the moment 3I, Atlas was first spotted, every observation, every single data point from telescopes around the world was fed into sophisticated computer models. These models account for the gravitational pull of every major body in the solar system, running simulations forward in time to plot an object's path with breathtaking accuracy. The International Minor Planet Center, the global clearinghouse for all such observations, collated the data, refining the comet's orbital elements with each passing night. The initial calculations were good. Within weeks, they were excellent. By the time the fragmentation occurred, they were effectively perfect. The consensus from Pasadena to Munich was unequivocal and absolute. 3I, Atlas, and its subsequent fragments posed no threat of impact to Earth. Not a small threat. Not a remote possibility. Zero threat. The comet's trajectory was set to carry it on a path that at its absolute closest point to us, its perigee would still be more than 116 million kilometers away. That's over 300 times the distance from the Earth to the Moon. To put it in perspective, if the Earth were the size of a basketball in New York City, the comet's closest approach would be like a grain of sand flying past Philadelphia. It was never coming close. It was never on a collision course. The fragments, though, now on slightly different paths, were all still bound by the same overarching orbital mechanics. They were following their parent body on its grand, harmless swing through the inner solar system, destined to loop back out into the cold darkness from whence they came. The fear of a global cataclysm of continents set ablaze and skies falling was based on a fundamental misunderstanding of the celestial highways. The solar system is vast, an emptiness almost impossible to comprehend, and the paths of the objects within it are governed by laws as immutable as time itself. The Wormwood theory required these laws to be suspended for the comet to take an impossible 90-degree turn and aim for our planet. But the universe does not operate on narrative convenience. It operates on gravity. And gravity's forecast was clear, a cosmic flyby and nothing more. Yet one final insidious piece of the theory remained. The name Wormwood itself from the biblical text implies bitterness, poison. The prophecy spoke of the waters being made bitter, of a third of mankind perishing. Even if the comet wasn't going to hit us directly, the theorists argued its tail, its very essence, could sweep across our world, depositing a toxic payload into our atmosphere and oceans. This was perhaps the most challenging claim to counter, as it strayed into the realm of chemistry and atmospheric science. But here too, our instruments provided the truth. The primary tool for this investigation is called spectroscopy, the universe's own fingerprinting kit. When sunlight passes through the coma of a comet, the cloud of gas and dust surrounding the nucleus, the molecules within that cloud absorb specific wavelengths of light. When we look at that light through a telescope equipped with a spectrograph, it's like passing it through a cosmic prism. The resulting spectrum is not a smooth, continuous rainbow. It's a band of light crossed by dark lines, an absorption spectrum. Each element, each molecule has a unique spectral barcode, a pattern of lines that reveals its presence as surely as a DNA test. By analyzing this barcode from 3I, Atlas astronomers could compile a precise inventory of its chemical composition from hundreds of millions of kilometers away. And what they found was utterly ordinary. The spectrum was dominated by the signatures of water ice, silicate, dust, essentially, fine sand, and frozen gases like carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide. These are the standard building block ingredients of our solar system. Yes, there were also trace amounts of more complex organic molecules, including compounds like cyanogen. The moment the word cyanide was mentioned, it was seized upon by the fearmongers. Here was the proof the poison of wormwood made manifest. But this revealed a profound lack of scientific context. Cyanide-based compounds are incredibly common in the cosmos and are found in virtually every comet ever studied. They are believed to be some of the fundamental building blocks from which life itself may have arisen on Earth. Furthermore, the concentrations were minuscule, spread out over a volume of space thousands of times larger than our own planet. The tail of a comet is one of the most perfect vacuums known in nature, far emptier than any vacuum we can create in a lab on Earth. The idea that this incredibly diffuse cloud of molecules could survive a journey of 116 million kilometers, enter Earth's atmosphere, and somehow poison the oceans was, from a chemical and physical standpoint, a complete fantasy. Any cometary dust that did enter our atmosphere, and a tiny amount does all the time, would be vaporized by friction high above the ground, its constituent molecules broken down and scattered harmlessly. So the final pillar of the apocalyptic theory collapsed under the weight of evidence. The comet was not a divine weapon. It was a natural object behaving naturally. Its fragmentation was not a preparation for impact. It was the result of solar heating. Its trajectory was not aimed at Earth. It was a harmless flyby. Its composition was not a biblical poison. It was the standard, life-giving stuff of the cosmos. Every single claim, every terrifying assertion had been met and dismantled by observation, calculation, and the application of physical law. The scientific community had held up a candle of reason, and the monstrous shadow that had terrified millions was revealed for what it was: nothing. A specter born of coincidence and confirmation bias. The case was closed. The comet would come. It would be a beautiful sight for amateur astronomers. It would fade, and it would leave. Humanity was safe. But as the data solidified and the scientific consensus became an unbreachable wall of fact, a new and more troubling question began to emerge. The celestial threat had been proven to be an illusion. The evidence was clear, public, and overwhelming. So why wasn't the fear going away? Why, for a significant portion of the population, did the facts not seem to matter at all? The mystery of Comet 3I, Atlas, was solved, but it had inadvertently exposed a deeper, more complex, and far more terrestrial darkness. The world's great observatories had delivered their verdict. The calculations run and rerun on supercomputers across the globe were unambiguous. Orbiting fragments of ice and dust, no matter how spectacularly they glowed in our evening skies, obey the same unyielding laws of gravity that bind our planet to the Sunday. The case from a scientific perspective was closed. Comet 3I Atlas was not a harbinger of doom. It was not the star called Wormwood. It was a dying celestial nomad, performing its final silent ballet for an audience of billions before fading back into the cosmic black. And yet, for millions of people, the scientific conclusion was not an ending. It was an obstacle, an inconvenience. For them, the real story, the one that truly mattered, was only just beginning to catch fire. As the comet's physical light dimmed in our skies, its metaphorical light as a symbol burned brighter than ever, fueled not by solar radiation but by something far more complex and volatile, the architecture of the human mind. The data was clear, but the narrative was more powerful. To understand what happened next, we have to turn our gaze away from the heavens and look inward into the labyrinth of our own psychology. We are, before anything else, storytelling animals. It is the fundamental way we process the universe. A story gives chaos, a shape it gives random events, a purpose, and it gives our own lives a place within a grander design. The scientific explanation for Comet Atlas was factually true, but it was not for many a satisfying story. It was a tale of orbital mechanics, gravitational perturbations, and the sublimation of volatile ices, a narrative written in the cold, impersonal language of mathematics. It explained the how, but it offered nothing for the why. In stark contrast, the Wormwood prophecy provided a story of breathtaking power. It was ancient, steeped in mysticism and authority. It spoke of sin and redemption, of cosmic judgment, and of a divine plan reaching its dramatic crescendo. It placed humanity at the very center of the cosmic stage. Which story, when you are faced with a world that feels increasingly frightening and unpredictable, offers more comfort? A story in which you are a cosmic accident, a temporary passenger on a spinning rock, or a story in which your existence, your very soul, is the subject of the ultimate celestial drama? The gravitational pull of a compelling narrative can, it turns out, be far stronger than the gravitational pull of a distant comet. This deep-seated need for a meaningful story opens the door to one of the most powerful and distorting forces in human cognition: confirmation bias. It is a subtle, almost invisible cognitive mechanism, a gatekeeper that stands guard at the entrance to our consciousness. Its job is simple: to welcome information that supports our existing beliefs with open arms, while turning away any data that challenges them. It's not a conscious choice, not a deliberate act of deception. It is an automatic energy-saving shortcut our brains have evolved to take. When you already believe that a celestial object is a divine sign, your mind doesn't go searching for evidence to the contrary. Instead, it embarks on a mission scanning the endless horizon of information for anything, absolutely anything, that bolsters the original idea. A blurry photograph of the comet is no longer just a poorly focused image. It becomes proof that they are hiding its true shape. A scientist's nuanced statement about the comet's unpredictable fragmentation is stripped of its context and transformed into a coded admission that they don't really know what's going on. Every ambiguous piece of data is molded to fit the pre-existing narrative. It is a deeply seductive process because being right feels good. Each piece of evidence delivers a small, satisfying hit of dopamine, a neurochemical reward for having your worldview affirmed. Conversely, confronting evidence that you are wrong is deeply uncomfortable, creating a state of cognitive dissonance, a mental static that the brain desperately wants to resolve. The easiest way to resolve it: discredit the source, question the motive, and retreat deeper into the fortress of your original belief. For those who saw wormwood in the sky, every scientific rebuttal was not a reason to reconsider. It was proof of a cover-up, further evidence that the establishment was trying to lull the public into a false sense of security before the inevitable end. The facts were bouncing off a psychological force field, one that grows stronger with every attack. In a previous era, this cognitive bias might have been confined to small communities, its spread limited by the speed of word of mouth. But Comet Atlas arrived in the age of the algorithm. It blazed across a digital sky, a landscape engineered to perfection for the cultivation and harvesting of confirmation bias. Social media platforms, in their relentless pursuit of our engagement, have built for us the most efficient echo chambers in human history. They are not nefarious, sentient architects of our division. They are simply systems designed to give us more of what we already like, what we already click on, what we already believe. When you searched for Comet Atlas Wormwood, the algorithm didn't present you with a balanced portfolio of peer-reviewed astronomical papers and fringe prophetic interpretations. It observed your initial curiosity and began to build a new reality around you, a digital terrarium customized to your budding belief. It fed you a steady diet of videos from charismatic online prophets, articles from conspiracy-focused websites, and testimonials from fellow believers across the world. Each click, each like, each shared post told the algorithm to dig deeper, to narrow the informational stream until your entire feed became a resounding chorus of agreement. This is the canyon of confirmation. From inside its walls, the only voice you can hear is your own, echoed back 1,000 times over each reflection, making the original belief seem more solid, more real, more undeniable. Dissenting views, the scientific explanations, the calm voices of reason, they are not even present in the canyon. They are outside in a different informational world, their voices lost in the wind. The system creates a feedback loop. The algorithm feeds the bias engages the user, and the engagement trains the algorithm to feed the bias even more. It is a digital wildfire, and a compelling fear-based narrative like the Wormwood prophecy is the perfect accelerant. It spreads faster than any fact-check, burning through the complex wiring of our social networks, leaving a scorched landscape of polarization in its wake. This digital amplification was happening against a backdrop of profound global anxiety. The comet reached its peak brightness in the spring of 2020, a time when humanity was in the grip of a once-in-a-century pandemic. The world felt fragile, unpredictable, and frightening. Our established routines were shattered, our institutions seemed to be failing, and the very air we breathed felt threatening. In this atmosphere of pervasive, free-floating fear, the human mind desperately searches for an anchor, for an explanation that can make sense of the senseless. Apocalyptic thinking thrives in such environments. It takes a chaotic collection of terrifying disconnected events, a plague, economic instability, social unrest, and weaves them into a single coherent tapestry of prophecy. The random cruelty of a virus is transformed into a sign, a divinely ordained trial. The comet is no longer a random visitor. It is a celestial punctuation mark in the final chapter of a pre-written story. This provides a strange and paradoxical comfort. The idea of a world ending according to a divine preordained plan can feel less terrifying than the idea of a world simply falling apart for no reason at all. A prophesied apocalypse, for all its horror, has a structure. It has rules. It has a beginning, a middle, and crucially, an end. For the believer, it offers a sense of control in a world where all control has been lost. If you know the script, if you have the secret knowledge of what is truly happening, you are no longer just a victim of circumstance. You are an initiate, one of the few who understands the terrible, magnificent truth. This search for meaning in the face of existential dread is a powerful human impulse, and the Wormwood theory offered a complete, ready-made answer at the precise moment the world was asking the most desperate questions. The belief, however, was not just about finding comfort or meaning. It was also a profound statement about trust and identity. For decades, trust in traditional institutions, government, academia, the media, and science itself has been steadily eroding. To a growing number of people, these institutions are not seen as objective arbiters of truth, but as compromised, self-serving entities with their own hidden agendas. When a scientist from a major university or a government agency appears on television to calmly debunk a theory, the message received by a skeptical audience is not one of reassurance, it is one of suspicion. Who are they working for? What are they not telling us? Why are they trying so hard to convince us that everything is fine? In this climate, the very act of debunking becomes paradoxically another piece of evidence for the conspiracy. The official story is rejected, precisely because it is official. This creates a vacuum of authority, and that vacuum is quickly filled by new voices, independent journalists, charismatic YouTubers, anonymous bloggers, and self-proclaimed prophets. These new authorities offer an alternative, a counter-narrative, that speaks directly to the feelings of alienation and mistrust harbored by their audience. To believe them and to reject the mainstream consensus becomes an act of rebellion. It is a declaration of independence from a system you feel has failed you. Your belief in the Wormwood theory ceases to be a simple opinion about a comet. It becomes a badge of identity. It signals which tribe you belong to. You are not one of the sheep blindly accepting what the authorities tell you. You are a critical thinker, a truth seeker, one of the enlightened few who can see past the lies. Once a belief becomes this deeply intertwined with a person's sense of self, it is almost impossible to dislodge with facts alone. An attack on the belief is perceived as an attack on the person. To abandon the theory would not just mean admitting you were wrong about a comet. For many, it would mean betraying their community, their identity, and their entire worldview. And so the strange saga of Comet 3I, Atlas, became a perfect microcosm of our deeply fractured age. The debate was never really about the science of cometary decay or the precise interpretation of a 2000-year-old text. It was a proxy war fought on the battleground of a celestial visitor. It was a conflict between two fundamentally different ways of knowing the world, one based on empirical evidence, peer review, and the humbling admission that knowledge is always provisional, the other based on faith, revelation, and the unshakable certainty of a sacred story. The comet forced us to choose a side. Were you with the astronomers with their charts and their spectral analysis? Or were you with the prophets, with their ancient texts and their urgent warnings? There was no middle ground. Sharing a scientific article about the comet's disintegration was a political act, a declaration of allegiance to Team Science. Sharing a video linking the comet to the apocalypse was a counter-declaration, a pledge of loyalty to Team Prophecy. The comet itself, a silent, indifferent ball of ice and rock, millions of miles away, became a screen onto which we projected our deepest anxieties, our most profound hopes, and our most bitter divisions. It revealed a terrifying truth in an information ecosystem poisoned by distrust and polarization. Objective reality is fragile. A fact is not a fact if the person you're speaking to believes you are fundamentally dishonest. Evidence is not evidence if your opponent is convinced it was fabricated by a shadowy cabal. The comet revealed that we no longer share a common set of facts upon which to build a consensus. We are increasingly living in separate realities, curated by algorithms and reinforced by our own cognitive biases, looking at the exact same sky and seeing entirely different universes. The fragments of 3I, Atlas, have now dispersed their faint glow long since swallowed by the void. They continue on their vast, lonely orbits, utterly unaware of the symbolic weight they were made to carry during their brief visit to our corner of the cosmos. The celestial threat is gone, but the mechanisms of belief it exposed, the deep fissures in our collective understanding of reality, have not vanished with it. The digital canyons that amplify fear and isolate us from opposing viewpoints have only grown deeper and wider. The erosion of trust in the very institutions designed to help us navigate a complex world continues unabated. The comet may have faded, but the human tendencies it brought into sharp relief, our desperate search for narrative, our vulnerability to bias, and our need to belong, remain as powerful as ever. It served as a dress rehearsal, a stark warning that the next time a truly world-altering event occurs, whether celestial or terrestrial, the greatest danger may not be the event itself, but our inability to agree on the nature of the threat, or even that a threat exists at all. The story of Wormwood has receded into the background, but the stage it performed on is still set, waiting for the next actor to arrive. And we are left to wonder what happens when the next object appears in our sky, and we are even less equipped to face it together. And so the vigil continued, a planet holding its breath, watching the Emerald Messenger approach its moment of truth. The models, the mathematics, the centuries of accumulated knowledge all pointed to a path that would keep us safe. Yet in the deepest recesses of the human mind, a place untouched by calculus and orbital mechanics, the ancient fear persisted, whispering of a prophecy unfolding. The tension was no longer just in the headlines or the forums, but in the very fabric of the global consciousness. 3I Atlas was bearing down not merely as a comet, but as a test, a final examination of our age. Would we be ruled by the specters of the past, or by the light of our own understanding? The answer, when it came, arrived not with a roar, but with a crack. It began with a single, ominous observation from an amateur astronomer, a slight elongation of the comet's core, the coma looking fuzzy. At first, it was dismissed as an atmospheric distortion, a trick of the light through miles of turbulent air. But then another observatory, high on a Chilean mountaintop, confirmed the anomaly. The heart of 3I, Atlas, the solid nucleus we had tracked so meticulously, was no longer a singular monolithic object. Something profound was happening deep within that verdant haze, billions of miles from the world that had projected all its hopes and anxieties onto its silent, frozen form. Within days, the world's most powerful eyes were trained on the spectacle. Hubble, turning its gaze from the deepest reaches of cosmic time, focused on our own solar system's unfolding drama. And what it revealed was staggering. The single point of light that had been Comet Atlas was gone. In its place was a ghostly convoy, a string of celestial pearls, at least 4 major fragments each, now a comet in its own right, drifting apart in a slow, inexorable cosmic ballet. The great crystalline cathedral, forged in the unimaginable cold of the Oort cloud over 4.5 billion years, had shattered. The very thing that made it a potential harbinger of doom, its sheer size and cohesion, was dissolving before our eyes. For the astronomers who had spent months charting its course, this was not a moment of failure, but of breathtaking opportunity. The disintegration was a windfall of cosmic proportions, an unplanned, spectacular experiment conducted on a system-wide scale. It was as if the universe had decided to perform an autopsy for us, peeling back the comet's outer layers to reveal its innermost secrets. The gravitational and thermal stresses of its approach to the Sun, that great celestial blowtorch at the heart of our system, had proven too much for its fragile structure. Like a block of ice dropped into warm water, it was succumbing to a relentless, unseen pressure. The prophecy of Wormwood spoke of a great star, solid and terrible, falling from heaven. What we were witnessing was not the fall of a star, but the gentle, silent dissolution of a cosmic snowball. As these ethereal fragments continued on their path, Each one now presented a unique puzzle for the scientific community. The global network of telescopes, both professional and amateur, sprang into a coordinated effort of unparalleled scale. Data poured in from every continent, a torrent of information that allowed us to chart the trajectory of each individual piece. The singular threat had become a diffuse cloud, a shotgun blast where a cannonball had been feared. And with this fragmentation came the first definitive, irrefutable piece of the scientific conclusion. The impact scenario, the world-altering cataclysm that fueled the panic, was now a physical impossibility. There was no longer a single massive object to strike us. The weapon had broken apart in the void. The bitter star had refused to hold its form. But science is never satisfied with a single answer. Knowing the comet would not hit us was no longer enough. The question now became, what times was this object? What was it made of? What story did its remnants have to tell? This is where the true power of modern astronomy was unleashed, not in just seeing, but in understanding. Spectroscopy, the art of dissecting light itself, became our scalpel. By capturing the faint reflected sunlight from these cometary ghosts, astronomers could break it down into its constituent colors, a rainbow barcode that revealed the chemical composition of the source. They were reading the ingredients of a primordial recipe, one that had been kept in a deep freeze at the edge of the solar system since before the Earth itself had fully formed. And the results that came back were in their own way as profound as the prophecy itself, though for entirely different reasons. The spectral signatures were unambiguous. They showed the overwhelming presence of water ice, a vast amount of it now sublimating directly into gas under the sun's relentless gaze. They revealed carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide, the very gases that form the breath of planets. They found traces of cyanogen, the chemical that gives comets their iconic green and blue hues, a harmless gas in the vacuum of space, but one whose name once sparked terrestrial fear. There were silicates, the fundamental building blocks of rock and complex organic molecules, the stuff of life itself. There was nothing alien, nothing unnatural, nothing demonic. In the heart of this supposed harbinger of destruction, we found the very same elements that constitute our world, our oceans, and even our own bodies. 3I. Atlas was not a messenger from some angry, vengeful god. It was a time capsule from our own shared cosmic past. It was family. This detailed chemical analysis provided the second nail in the coffin of the wormwood theory. The biblical text speaks of a star that makes the waters bitter, implying a kind of cosmic poison, a celestial contamination. The reality revealed by the light was the precise opposite. Comets like Atlas are now understood to be the bringers of water, the delivery system that may have filled Earth's early oceans and seeded our nascent world with the organic precursors to life. If it was a messenger, it was one of creation, not destruction. The profound irony was that the object of our terror was a relative of the very celestial bodies that made our existence possible. Fear, it turned in the end, was simply a failure of perspective. And then came the moment of closest approach. The dates that had been circled in red on calendars of doom, the period when the world was supposed to tremble, arrived. Late May 2020. The shattered remnants of 3I, Atlas, now a faint, almost imperceptible smudge in the night sky, drifted past our planet at a distance of over 70 million miles. That is 300 times farther away than our own moon. There were no gravitational tides to disrupt our oceans. There was no rain of fire, no darkening of the sun. The waters of the earth did not turn bitter. They remained as they always were. The great climax, the prophesied apocalypse, turned out to be the most profound non-event of the century. The world did not end. It simply kept turning. For those of us who watched through telescopes, it was a moment of quiet, sublime beauty. We were witnessing the final act of a long and lonely journey. An object that had spent millions of years falling toward the sun only to be torn apart in the final moments of its pilgrimage. Its scattered light, traveling across the immense void, carried with it no malice, no judgment. It carried only the fundamental truths of physics and chemistry. It was a lesson written in fading light against the backdrop of infinity, that the universe operates on principles we can understand, that its grandeur is not in its capacity for wrath, but in its unwavering adherence to elegant, predictable laws. The terror of Wormwood was a human invention. The silent passage of Atlas was a cosmic fact. This, then, is the triumph. Not just that we survived, but that we knew times we would. The resolution to this global drama was not found in prayer or prophecy, but in the painstaking collaborative work of thousands of scientists. It was a victory for orbital mechanics, a discipline that allows us to trace the gravitational pathways of the solar system with astonishing precision. Think of it, we took a handful of faint observations, pinpricks of light against an ocean of black, and from them we constructed a vision of the future. We built a mathematical ghost, a projection of the comet's path, and followed that ghost through space and time. We accounted for the subtle nudges of Jupiter's gravity, the gentle push of the sun's own radiation on the comet's tail, the unpredictable outgassing jets that could alter its course. Every single variable was fed into complex simulations, computer models that ran the clock forward, playing out every possible scenario billions of times over. This process, this digital scrying, is the modern form of prophecy, but it is a prophecy written in the language of the universe itself, mathematics. It does not offer certainty based on faith, but confidence based on evidence and repeatable calculation. When the scientists on our screens told you the comet would miss, it wasn't a guess, it wasn't wishful thinking. It was the result of a chain of logic stretching back to Newton and Kepler, refined by Einstein, and executed by the most powerful computational tools humanity has ever created. They were simply reading a gravitational script that had been written when the solar system was born. The path was preordained not by a divine will, but by the fundamental force that holds the galaxies themselves together. The disintegration of 3I Atlas only served to reinforce the power of this methodology. As the comet fractured, each new piece had to be tracked. Its orbit had to be recalculated. The problem became exponentially more complex. Yet the global scientific community met the challenge seamlessly. Data was shared openly, instantly, across borders and oceans. An observatory in Hawaii would pass its final observations for the night to a team in Australia, just waking up a continuous planet-wide chain of observation. This was not the work of a lone genius, but a testament to our ability to cooperate in the face of a great unknown. We built a global picture of what was happening, fragment by fragment, and that picture was always consistently one of reassurance. The data never lied, it never wavered. It simply pointed with ever-increasing clarity toward a harmless outcome. So what are we left with? As the last faint photons from the ghost of Atlas begin their long journey back out into the interstellar dark, we are left with a choice. The story of Wormwood, born of ancient anxieties, offered a narrative of helplessness, of cosmic judgment, of a humanity at the mercy of inscrutable and terrifying forces. It's a powerful story, one that has echoed through millennia because it speaks to our deepest fears of the unknown. But the story of 3I, Atlas, offers a different narrative, a new story for a new millennium. It's a story about curiosity, about collaboration, about courage. It tells us that the sky is not a source of omens to be feared, but a laboratory to be explored. It proves that the greatest mysteries of the universe are not beyond us, but are puzzles waiting for us to solve. It demonstrates with irrefutable elegance that knowledge is the most powerful antidote to fear we have ever devised. The central conflict was never truly between a comet and the Earth. It was between two fundamentally different ways of seeing our place in the cosmos. One is ancient, rooted in the darkness, interpreting every flicker of light as a portent of doom. The other is modern, born of the Enlightenment, which sees the light not as an omen, but as information, as data, as the key to unlocking the universe's own story. The saga of Comet Atlas was the battlefield on which these two worldviews met. And in the end, there was a clear victor. The telescope defeated the text. Observation vanquished superstition. Reason, quiet and methodical, triumphed over the loud gongs of panic. We stood at a precipice of fear, looked into the abyss, and found not a monster staring back, but a reflection of our own origins, scattered and beautiful. The bitter star never fell. Instead, it dissolved into a glittering testament to the power of science to deliver us from the darkness of our own anxieties. The case of Wormwood for now is closed. The verdict rendered not in a court of law, but in the silent, unforgiving court of celestial mechanics is clear: not guilty. The prophecy was a ghost story, a powerful metaphor for its time, but in the bright, unflinching light of the 21st century, it was revealed to be just that, a story. Our reality, the one we measure and test and verify, was and is so much more interesting, and thankfully so much safer. But the sky is vast, and time is long. 3I Atlas was just one visitor, a single voice in a cosmic choir that has been singing since the dawn of time. Its safe passage was a relief, its story a lesson. Yet it was also a reminder that our solar system is not a sterile clockwork diorama. It is a dynamic, evolving, and sometimes violent place. While this particular messenger proved to be harmless, its journey through our collective consciousness forced us to confront a much larger and more pressing question. Atlas may not have been the one, but the universe is filled with rocks and ice, trillions of them on journeys of their own. And statistics, the cold and sober cousin of prophecy, tells us that their paths will not always be so accommodating. The question is no longer times. If times, another object will pose a genuine threat, but times when asterisk, and what we will do when it arrives. And so the celestial messenger we followed, with such breathless anticipation, the icy wanderer christened 3I Atlas, has delivered its final silent verdict. It did not arrive as a cataclysmic harbinger of bitterness and death, nor did it fulfill the dark ancient poetry of a prophecy carved from turmoil. Instead, it met an end that is in its own way just as profound, a quiet and lonely disintegration under the unrelenting glare of our Sunday. The would-be Wormwood, the star of endless online speculations, simply crumbled its heart of ice and dust, surrendering to the laws of physics. It became not a single terrifying bullet aimed at the heart of our world, but a cascade of glittering, harmless fragments, a fleeting, ghostly ruin drifting back into the obscurity from which it so briefly emerged. For many, this was an anticlimax, a cosmic spectacle that fizzled out. But for us on this journey from revelation to resolution, this quiet dissolution is the most important part of the story. It is the denouement, not just for a comet, but for a powerful and persistent idea, forcing us to turn our gaze away from the imagined threat in the heavens and toward the very real, very human turmoil that gave that phantom its power. We began this exploration by pulling at a single tantalizing thread, a name, Wormwood, whispered from the pages of a 2,000-year-old text, a text born from the fire and anxiety of its own apocalyptic age. What we discovered was that this story was never truly about a comet. It was, and has always been, about us. It's about a deep, primal and profoundly human instinct to search for meaning in the grand, silent theater of the night sky, to project our hopes, our dreams, and most potently our fears, onto the canvas of the cosmos. The ancients looked to the heavens for portents and signs, for divine assurance or celestial condemnation, because the sky was their calendar, their map, and their ultimate mystery. Eclipses, comets, meteor showers, these were not merely astronomical events. They were divine interruptions in the established order, messages to be decoded. The vision of Wormwood was never an astronomical prediction. It was a metaphor, a powerful piece of symbolic poetry, expressing the profound suffering and perceived corruption of its time. The bitter star was a literary device representing poison, despair, and upheaval in a world that felt like it was teetering on the brink of collapse. It was the pain of the human condition given a cosmic form, a way to articulate a sense of dread so overwhelming that it could only be imagined as falling from heaven itself. For millennia, that powerful metaphor lay dormant an echo in a sacred book. But in our modern age, an age paradoxically defined by both unprecedented knowledge and unprecedented connectivity, that ancient echo found a new, terrifying voice. The story of 3i, Atlas, and its entanglement with prophecy, is a uniquely modern fable, a cautionary tale about how our most advanced tools for sharing information can become the world's most efficient engines for spreading fear. The Internet, our global repository of knowledge, became a digital seance, summoning an ancient ghost and clothing it in the language of science. A kernel of truth, the discovery of a new brightening comet, was fed into the vast, churning machinery of social media algorithms. It was then amplified within digital echo chambers, curated spaces where belief is reinforced and doubt is cast out, where confirmation bias is not a bug, but the central feature. Every new image, every piece of observational data, every scientific update was no longer just information. It became evidence to be warped and reframed. A routine spectral analysis showing the comet's composition was twisted to mean it carried an otherworldly poison. A calculated trajectory, safely millions of miles from Earth, was reinterpreted by amateur prophets as a cover-up, a deliberate deception by a monolithic them who control what you're allowed to know. This is the insidious nature of modern misinformation. It doesn't always invent falsehoods from whole cloth. Instead, it acts as a parasite on the truth, borrowing the credibility of genuine science while secretly poisoning its meaning from within. It creates a compelling, emotionally resonant narrative that feels more satisfying, more complete than the messy, uncertain, and often complex reality. The story of a doomsday comet fulfilling an ancient prophecy is a blockbuster film. The story of an icy conglomerate following the predictable laws of orbital mechanics and solar radiation is a textbook. In the battle for our attention and our belief, the dramatic narrative almost always has the upper hand. We learned that a lie, when wrapped in the comforting cloak of certainty and shared by a trusted online community, can travel around the globe while the truth is still painstakingly gathering its evidence, checking its sources, and waiting for peer review. The fear of wormwood, supercharged by the internet, became a contagion of the mind, a testament to our vulnerability when faced with a compelling story that confirms our deepest anxieties about an uncertain future. It preyed upon a fundamental desire for the world to make sense, to have a hidden order, even if that order is a terrifying one. Because for some, the idea of a planned apocalypse is less frightening than the idea of a universe that is vast, indifferent, and fundamentally random. A prophecy provides a script. It gives us a role to play, a side to choose. Random chance, on the other hand, offers only the cold, hard work of vigilance and understanding. And it is precisely there, in that cold, hard work, that we find our salvation. If fear and misinformation were the poison of this story, then the scientific method in all its slow, methodical, and meticulous glory was the antidote. Science offered us a different way of seeing, a different way of knowing, one based not on revelation or ancient authority, but on observation, evidence, and a radical willingness to be wrong. It provided us with a sturdy vessel to navigate the turbulent waters of speculation, a craft built from the accumulated knowledge of generations. Remember the journey of our understanding. It began with the first faint detection by the Atlas Sky Survey, the Asteroid Terrestrial Impact Last Alert System, a name that is itself a testament to science's role as our planetary guardian. From that single humble point of light, a global collaborative effort unfolded. Astronomers from every continent, both professional and amateur, turned their instruments toward this new visitor. They were not searching for prophecy, they were searching for data. With each passing night, the portrait of the comet grew clearer. Telescopes measured its trajectory with astonishing precision, plotting its path through the solar system with calculations that confirmed unequivocally that it posed no threat to Earth. Its course was not a mystery subject to interpretation. It was a gravitational pathway, as predictable as the rising of the Sunday then. As it drew closer to that sun, they watched its brightness. For a time it surged, fueling the apocalyptic fervor. But the scientific community urged caution, reminding us that comets are notoriously fickle. They are not solid monolithic rocks. They are fragile, dirty snowballs, as the astronomer Fred Whipple so perfectly described them. Their behavior is complex, a delicate dance between their structure and the sun's energy. Spectrometers' instruments that can decode the light from distant objects were brought to bear on 3I, Atlas. They dissected its faint glow, breaking it down into a rainbow of frequencies, and in that light, they read its chemical signature. They found the expected signatures of cyanogen and diatomic carbon, the typical gases of a typical comet boiled from its icy nucleus. There was no exotic world-ending poison, no biblical bitterness, only the fundamental chemistry of our solar system's ancient past. And then came the final decisive chapter, written not in a sacred scroll but in the pixels of a charge-coupled device on the Hubble Space Telescope. As the world watched holding its breath for different reasons, Hubble delivered the images that silenced the prophecies. It saw not one object but a collection of them. The great star had fractured. The tidal forces of gravity and the relentless pressure of sunlight had done what they have done to countless comets before. They had pulled it apart. The nucleus, the heart of the prophecy, had failed. There was no impact, no cataclysm, no fallen star poisoning the waters. There was only the quiet, elegant, and inescapable reality of celestial mechanics. Each of these steps, discovery, calculation, observation, analysis, was a triumph of critical thinking. It was the triumph of a process designed specifically to overcome our biases, to question our assumptions, and to follow the evidence wherever it leads, even if it leads to a less dramatic but far more truthful conclusion. This process is humanity's single greatest tool for distinguishing what is real from what we desperately want or fear to be real. So where does this journey leave us? Standing here at the end, looking back at the ghost of a comet and the echo of a prophecy, it leaves us, I hope, with a renewed sense of awe, but also with a profound sense of responsibility. The cosmos is not a passive backdrop for our human dramas. It is an active, dynamic, and sometimes dangerous environment. There are, without question, real threats out there in the darkness. Asteroids and comets that do have Earth-crossing orbits exist. The universe is filled with unimaginable energies, supernovae, gamma-ray bursts, events of such staggering power that they make our terrestrial concerns seem insignificant. This is precisely why we cannot afford to waste our energy, our focus, and our collective emotional resources chasing celestial phantoms born of ancient texts. The very real danger is that while we are distracted by the specter of a mythical wormwood, we might miss the approach of a real physical impactor that science is trying to warn us about. Fear is a poor navigator. It clouds judgment and makes us susceptible to the easy answers offered by charlatans and modern-day prophets. But science, with its demand for rigor and its foundation in verifiable fact, is the steady compass that allows us to chart a safe course through a hazardous cosmos. It empowers us. It transforms us from passive, frightened subjects of a chaotic universe into knowledgeable, capable custodians of our own small, precious world. It allows us to build the telescopes that watch the skies, to develop the technologies to potentially deflect a threat, and to foster the global cooperation needed to protect our entire species. In the end, our fascination with the stars is one of our most noble qualities. It is the root of our science, our philosophy, our art, and our religion. The desire to look up and wonder, to seek our reflection in the cosmic ocean is what drives us forward. The story of 3I, Atlas, and Wormwood was a powerful reminder that we have a choice in how we engage with that wonder. We can choose to see the universe as a source of cryptic threats, a place where ancient fears are waiting to be realized, forcing us to retreat into the comforting but fragile shelters of myth and superstition. Or we can choose to see it as it truly is, a place of breathtaking complexity and profound physical beauty, a universe governed by laws that we can, through patience and ingenuity, come to understand. We can find meaning not in imagining our stories written upon the stars, but in the far more staggering reality that we and our world are made of stardust. We are not separate from the cosmos looking in, we are a part of it. We are the universe's attempt to understand itself. That is a story far grander, far more inspiring, and far more true than any ancient prophecy. It is the ongoing story of science, a story of discovery, a story of us bravely and rationally facing the magnificent, luminous dark